Historian of the novel Wuthering Heights. I'll be explaining some of the history behind this novel. It was placed in Yorkshire, England, probably around, I think, the 18th to 19th century, and some of the government issues and movements of war were I can only find was the Victorian era of Britain, and throughout the time, Emily Bront wrote it around that time of the Victorian era. It was through the reign of Queen Victoria. Britain was at the time, a place of peace and confidence, which is some parts of the novel at times. So I kind of looked up something. It said something about consumption was one of a really prevalent disease during England at the time, during the 1800s. The Industrial Revolution was partially a part of that era too. It caused certain social classes to differ. The Earnshaws, which is a family, and the Lintons, which is two families in the novel, or the higher class. They also invested money away in order to build their social class, but they were building money in the Grange of which is the higher certain class. It also displays a kind of period shift in population from one side, which was the countrysides, to larger cities and towns, which was part of the Industrial Revolution at the time. Social norms and beliefs were probably only social classes, which is part of the novel. Social classes affected many people or the characters of the novel, and part of it affects the plot as well. Heathcliff and Catherine are in love, or they think they are, and Heathcliff loses his love because of the different social classes. One was part of the lower, one was part of the upper class. Heathcliff has grown into the upper class, but he still remembers his struggles from when he was younger, and he was living at the Heights, and it wasn't comparable to the Grange. Most importantly, the characters accepted some of their placements in their classes that they were already born into. And social norms of the Victorian era include like certain gender roles, economic status, and sometimes religion. And men were also kind of expected to be the household of the head of the families in the household leader, at the time. And one of the questions asked if the novel was set in the same period the author lived, and the answer is yes. Wuthering Heights was written by Emily Bront and was published at the time that she lived, which was the year of 1847, in the 1800s and 1900s. Bront wrote this novel to demonstrate some of the social standards at the time. While Bront was alive, she was able to focus more on the individuals as a whole instead of the individuals that closely relate to her in her life. She used social classes and individuals to interpret different emotions, such as love and passion and whatever else they felt throughout the novel. Emily was born near Bradford, West Yorkshire, England, and this kind of helped develop the setting of the novel, as it was set in Yorkshire, England. And then Bront suffered from tuberculosis and died in 1848, exactly, I think 1 year after, 1848, 1847, exactly 1 year after she published the book.
All right. So Bronte wrote Wuthering Heights during the Victorian era of England, and as a result, we can see some aspects of her culture within the book. And the first place where we see this, or one of the places we see this, is through Heathcliff and Hareton. So in this quote down there, I think Heathcliff comes back after disappearing for 3 years, and he completely takes everyone by surprise. This boy who used to be called a plowboy, and he comes back and he takes everybody aghast. He's worked hard to become this new person so he could end up with Catherine, because Catherine would marry him because he was too unrefined and insulted for being who he was. All right. And then through Hareton down there, through that, he continues to learn how to read. But the context between this is, once Heathcliff takes over the Heights, he puts Hareton in a slave position basically, and he prevents him from ever reading and stuff like that, and getting education. But despite this, he like constantly is trying to learn, and like even though he's being berated by Catherine, the young Catherine, for like being stupid or whatever, he keeps on going, and like he works to become better, and like, you know, stuff like that. All right. After that, the next aspect of Victorian England is the class structure and like the expectations of the classes. So the poor people in the story, people like Joseph, or I guess temporarily Hareton, and basically the Heights, the people at the Heights, they're like, they act differently. They act how they wanted, you know. They took jabs at each other and their masters, and they talk differently, you know. And people didn't really care what they did. But on the other hand, the rich people are held to a different standard. People are like old Catherine, you know. She's still like a noble woman or something, or like a woman of higher status, all right. And like she's expected to stay rich, in the rich, you know, whatever. And we can see, she acts proper, and we can see this through what Catherine says to Nellie in one of the chapters. She's basically saying, I can't marry Heathcliff because of the way Edgar Linton talks about him. Like he's like, it just keeps putting him down in the dust, and she can't bring herself to marry him as a result. So through this like conflicting relationship, we can see like the importance of class and stuff during this time. So the next thing is, you can see how wealthy people would approach love and such at a time like this, right? So at this time, love is like reserved, I guess, in a way. It's like, it's not really something to be talked about. And it's like, for the poor, it's not watched as much, but for the wealthy people, it's watched a lot. And we can see this through Nellie, right? But down here, right? So Nellie right here, she's snooping through young Catherine's letters, because she suspects something's up with the Linton Heathcliff over there, and she's watching it because you know they're wealthy. You know, she can't mess up this opportunity. You know, so that's where that's seen. Okay, and then also people are seen being reserved because throughout the book, there was like 3 childbirths in the story, right? And the story keeps going, but never is there like a mention of like procreation or whatever in it. So like you can see that Bronte was reluctant to write about it because she knew it'd be not like accepted in society when she wrote about it. But you know it is accepted, men dominating over everybody. So throughout the story, we can see that men hold a lot more power. And through this quote down here, it's like Heathcliff's plan to take over the Linton estate is through his son Linton, right? Marrying Catherine, the young one. But this only works because when they marry, even though Catherine's rightfully the one to own the land, Linton overtakes that control, right? So like he bypasses her. So we can see that men are like up there compared to like Catherine, just like down here or something, okay? And then one final thing is like religion. Like even though science is on the rise at the time, people were still being pretty religious, right? It's like we can see this through like Joseph, right? And like this little childhood story about how they were forced to go to church, and 3 hours of church wasn't enough, and like it's just like mention of heaven and hells and like where people are gonna go after they die, and that's it. That's the biggest things I could see in the book.
So in Wuthering Heights, there are like so many characters. First there's Mr. Heathcliff. He is the main focus in the novel, alongside his love, Catherine, the older one, the dead one. He is at first an underdog and is abused by Henley, Mr. Henley, who doesn't like him very much because he was adopted. He's in love with Catherine, but him and Catherine cannot marry each other. And he is the current owner of Wuthering Heights. He drives the plot with, of course, his dramatic love life with Catherine. As the original owner's daughter of Wuthering Heights, she marries Edgar Linton and is in love with Heathcliff since childhood. She drives the plot because of her love for Heathcliff, but her refusal to marry him because of his status. She is a true woman of her time. They did not believe in true love and marrying the person you love, but marrying for... Lockwood is a guest at Wuthering Heights and evokes a story to be told by asking Nellie Dean to tell him the past of Wuthering Heights. He's very vain and not very essential to the story. Nellie Dean has served family at Wuthering Heights since she's been born. She's the art inside eye for the past of Wuthering Heights and Catherine and Heathcliff's story. She drives the plot by telling Catherine to not marry Heathcliff because it would affect her station. She is a loyal companion to Catherine and does not. Edgar Linton is married to Catherine. He's very spoiled and rich, but a perfect gentleman. He's the exact opposite of Heathcliff. He's pretty much used in the story as a pawn or an obstacle to get in Heathcliff's Isabel way. Linton is the sister of Edgar Linton and is married to Heathcliff. She lives in Wuthering Heights and is abused by Heathcliff, much in the same way that he was abused by Henley. She is used as a buffer so Heathcliff can take his anger towards Edgar and Catherine out on someone. Every single character in Wuthering Heights is extremely dramatic and has their very own way of making the plot of this story so thick and so hard to dig out of.
Diction Detective Henry here. Today I'll be helping you visualize the world Emily Bronte has created in Wuthering Heights. Through diction, I was able to formulate society's perspective on Wuthering Heights through the setting, social class, and religion. To begin with, we have a scene from chapter 1 where Lockwood is describing the setting of Wuthering Heights in his diary. He writes, happily, the architect had foresight to build it strong. The narrow windows are deeply set in the wall and the corners defended with large jutting stones. So through the phase large jutting stones, the readers may establish that the heights are uncivilized by using a fallacy to reflect on its inhabitants. This impacts the plot because it displays an uncomfortable and cold atmosphere, which gives the reader a type of setting that Wuthering Heights has. Moving on to social class, the quotes from this section allows the readers to differentiate between the upper class and the lower class in the characters. So for our first quote, it's a scene in chapter 1 where Joseph is first introduced to the readers. He says, "What are ye for? The master's down in the fold. Go round by the end of La if you want to speak to him." So Emily Bronte introduces Joseph as an elderly servant with non-standard spelling. The spelling allows the reader to identify it as slang, which is an informal way to speak, right? So it shows one's educational level. So this impacts the plot because now the reader can depict characters from the upper or lower class based on the way they speak. Moving on to our second quote for the social class section. This scene happens in chapter 7 when Heathcliff and Catherine go to Thrushcross Grange to spy on the Lintons. Eventually, the two get caught and are confronted by Mrs. Linton. She says, "Miss Earnshaw, scoring the county with a gypsy, and yet, my dear, the child is in mourning, surely it is, and she may be lame for life." So this is the first time a difference is shown between Catherine and Heathcliff because the Lintons treat Catherine with civility because she's an Earnshaw, while they judge Heathcliff for being a gypsy. This helps impact the plot because we can visualize how the higher class treats those of the lower class. Lastly, for religion, we have a scene that comes from chapter 3 when Lockwood is dreaming of himself and a preacher inflicting violence upon each other. Lockwood says, "Fellow Martins, have at him, drag him down and crush him to atoms." Him referring to the preacher. And the preacher responds with, "Brethren, execute him upon the judgment written." So despite the two being religiously inclined, they both innate violence upon each other. This scene establishes the idea of forgiveness of sin, which is relevant throughout the novel. From this, one can foreshadow that there is plenty of sin and not much forgiveness in Wuthering Heights. Here you have it, the one and only diction detective for Wuthering Heights. I hope that my diction detective skills helped you establish the world Emily Bronte has created in Wuthering Heights.
Okay, so my topic is relating to the idea, or my topic is theme in Wuthering Heights. So there are a couple of themes in the story. However, the one that stands out is love in the story. Love is seen the most in between Heathcliff and Catherine, in that each side has intense and complex feelings for each other. For Heathcliff, his love for Catherine becomes his desire to obtain land and possessions from both the Lintons and the Earnshaw. And for Catherine, her love for Heathcliff becomes a major contributor to her death in the story. Many conflicts like this are very destructive in nature, and the sole reason for it is due to love. The one that causes this, which is Heathcliff, is of course in love, and it is solely due to it he becomes very unstable and destructive throughout the story. However, the opposite can also be said, in that love can create stability in one person, and it is seen the most in between Hareton and the young Catherine. Despite the fact that this couple shares many similarities to the previous couple, there are many factors that inhibit a positive and lighthearted outcome for this couple. For one thing, both Hareton and young Catherine tries to understand each other, unlike the previous. Another is that there is no forced competition, like another Linton, as well as there is being forced to marry each other due to social class. You can also say that Nellie Dean kind of pushes them together as well, unlike Heathcliff and Catherine throughout the story. And so, if you look at in between these two couples, you can say that love is kind of like a nuclear power plant. It can provide positive outcomes, but has the potential for events like Chernobyl if not treated correctly. Like a nuclear power plant, it also has a byproduct, which is, for this case, it is the feeling of revenge. Heathcliff had a difficult childhood. For one thing, he was ridiculed by both Hindley and the Lintons, but the one thing that hit him the most was his indirect rejection from Catherine. And so in his adult years, he has spent most of his time in his revenge plot by claiming land, Hareton, and Catherine from these people. One thing can be taken away from these acts, in that over time, revenge is built up and dished out in greater magnitudes compared to the inflictors, which was the Lintons, Hindley, and maybe even Catherine. Heathcliff eventually won against his revenge plot, in that it led to the destruction and death of these people. However, later in his years, he has a little bit of he has lost his sudden desire of destruction, and that it can best be stated from when he said, "I have lost the faculty of enjoying their destruction." So, the idea of revenge can best be seen from Heathcliff, in that despite the fact that revenge can give pleasure to the person during the act, it never satisfies them and leaves destructions in both parties. Okay, so another theme in the story is the implementation of a social class in Wuthering Heights. Despite the fact that Heathcliff was adopted into the Earnshaw family, he was never really in it, solely due to these two factors of appearance and background. Lighter skin and lighter hair was more preferred over darker skin and tanner skin and darker hair. The fact that Heathcliff was never biologically part of the family also earned him ridicule from Hindley. And however, there was this one instance where Heathcliff tried to understand this higher society by pushing down his pridefulness as well as his dirty nature by dressing up nicely in the story and appealing to both the Lintons and Hindley. However, both the Lintons and Hindley pushed him back, which led him to which pushed him even more into his destructive path. This miscommunication has led to suffering from both sides, which was of course not a positive outcome. A lesson can be learned from what happened between Hareton and Catherine, and that while Hareton was of course born from the Earnshaw family, he was treated as a servant of lower class. So whenever Hareton and Catherine got together, both tried to understand each other, and so it led to a positive outcome.
Some of the symbols in Wuthering Heights includes colors, ghosts, weather, and the dogs. So to begin, the colors show a difference in class, more so a difference between Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights. So while Wuthering Heights was often described as dark and gloomy and mysterious, Thrushcross Grange was described more lighthearted. It was described as more lighthearted, it was luscious, and there was just way more life to the description of Thrushcross Grange. So, for instance, when Catherine and Heathcliff are sneaking around Thrushcross Grange, Catherine says, "A splendid place, carpeted with crimson and crimson-colored chairs and tables, in a pure white ceiling bordered by gold, a shower of glass drops hanging in silver chains from the center, and shimmering with little soft tapers." So, here Bronte uses strong adjectives such as the crimson, gold, silver, and shimmering with the softness, while when she describes Wuthering Heights, it's more dark and it's more like brunt. Is that a word? Brunt? And it's more lonely than Thrushcross Grange. So it definitely shows a difference in class. And she also talks about the ghosts, and they symbolize the memories and the haunting of memories, such as when Heathcliff is at Catherine's grave and he says, "Her presence was with me. It remained while I refilled the grave, and I should see her there. I was sure she was with me, and I could not help talking to her." So it's as if his memory of Catherine is following him around, and he can't get rid of the pain that follows him along with the memory of Catherine, and that's why there are ghosts in Wuthering Heights, because the ghosts represent the actual mental pain that he is feeling from missing Catherine and all of the memories that Catherine left behind. So she just puts the mental thoughts into a physical aspect, which is the ghost. And she also uses nature and weather to symbolize the character's emotions. So often in the novel, the character's emotions would mirror, or more so, the weather would mirror the character's emotions. Like when Catherine is feeling better from being sick, that's a more lighthearted part of the novel. And so Edgar says, "The snow is quite gone down here, darling, and I only see 2 white spots on the whole range of the moors. The sky is blue, and the larks are singing, and the becks and brooks are all brimful. Catherine, last spring at this time I was longing to have you under this roof, and now I wish you were a mile or 2 up those hills." So, because Catherine is getting better, it's not because she's getting better. So as Catherine is getting better, the weather is starting to also get better, and they mirror each other. And then when Catherine dies and they bury her, it says that the snow is starting to fall, and that's more so like a time of peace before the snow starts to like shower, and then everything goes bad again. And then finally she uses dogs to show the character's emotions, more so the violent side, and it's more so the violence in their mood. So when Catherine and Heathcliff are sneaking around Thrushcross Grange once again, Catherine says, "Run, Heathcliff, run. They have let the bulldog loose and he holds me." So it shows the bulldogs are actually symbolizing the Linton's emotions, as it's the Linton's bulldog. So the Lintons actually have the hold on Catherine, and she's actually saying that the Lintons have a hold on Catherine and they let Heathcliff go because they don't want Heathcliff. And that goes back to the colors, where Catherine is more wanted in the upper society, and this just this marks the separation, the clear separation between Catherine and Heathcliff, and this is when they actually start to drift apart, and that's when Catherine starts spending all of her time at Thrushcross Grange, while Heathcliff has to stay at Wuthering Heights because, you know, the dog didn't want him, and so he had to go back to Wuthering Heights while Catherine got to go up to this higher society. And so the dogs overall just represent the character's emotions, and so just like when the Lintons got the hold on Catherine at the beginning of the novel, Heathcliff got the hold on Lockwood. So the dogs just represent the violence in the characters and their emotions.